Well, for those of you who may not know me, I'm Dave Suarez, Carlos's son. On behalf of my mother, sisters, and family, thank you all so much for joining with us today. We are here not only to mourn, but more importantly to honor and celebrate the wonderful memories and light my father left within each of us. I've been asked by my family to offer you a eulogy. It's quite a daunting task to face for anyone, let alone for a dear departed parent. My mother called me in Chicago a couple of days ago and asked me how long I planned on speaking. And I told her I had about 6 or 7 pages typed out. And she said, one of her favorite expressions, oh, too much. You're going to bore everybody, you're going to be talking too long, 6 and 7 pages, too much. So this morning I sat down and did some really careful and painstaking editing, and I've got it down to 8 pages. So how do you sum up the rich life of 85 years in a Friday afternoon eulogy? Simply you don't, nor do you need to. To quote Charles Gaines, no person can sum up the life of another. Life is too precious to be passed over with mere words which ring empty. Rather, it must remain as those who loved and watched and shared remember it. For such memories are alive, unbound by events of birth or death. And as living memories, we possess the greatest gift one person can give to one another. Many of you here today have known my father for a long time. However, I'll bet most of you know very little about his history. He just never knew about it. About 15 years ago, my parents came to Chicago to see the World Cup soccer games, and I somehow had the foresight to videotape about 2.5 hours of my father. I interviewed him and asked him questions from where was he born, who was his grandparents, what's your favorite movie, what's your favorite car, everything, and I heard a lot of great stories, some old and some I had never heard before. And I'd like to take this time to share with you a few of those stories. Carlos Suarez was born right here in Florida in 1924, while his parents were trying to make a new start in this country. Unfortunately, his parents separated and his mother moved back to Spain when my father was only a year old. Back in Spain, his family had little money, but they had shelter, food, and each other. He went to a good Jesuit school and was taught by the Maristas. Life was good. Of course, all that came crashing down in 1936 when my father was 8 years old and the Spanish Civil War started. General Franco's army occupied the city in which he lived, Oviedo. Since his family had remained loyal to the current democratic government and opposed Franco, his mother was thrown into jail, falsely accused of being a spy. Meanwhile, the city was under siege that would last for years. My father described how all the homes were attached to the sides, sort of like the townhouses in this country. I was amazed to learn how everyone had to break a little hole into each other's homes so that no one would have to go into the streets and risk being shot by one side or the other. And people would travel from one home to the other and then run across the street to the next set of homes and go through everyone's homes. And they did this in search for food that was being lifted into Oviedo. When I was 13 and 14 years old, my biggest worry was whether my parents were going to buy the Beatles album, the newest Beatles album, the first day it came out, or if I had to wait a week. My father, during that time, was busy searching for food, not only for himself, but also to bring to his mother in jail so that she wouldn't starve to death. When he was 16, When he was 16, the Civil War ended, and my mother and his mother returned home. Things weren't much better for the next few years as lawlessness and poverty made life extremely difficult. It is a testament to my father that after having to live his childhood like that he would end up being so calm, gentle, and caring. It's even more surprising that we never heard him complain or even suggest that he had a bad break growing up. In 1945, when he was 21, his father, who was living in Connecticut, sent over some money so that he could come to the US. During the 40-day trip over here, the war ended in Europe. Upon arriving in Miami and not knowing how to speak any English, they slapped a tag on his lapel with his name and final destination. It was a slow train to Connecticut, and one of the stories my father told me is when he sat down for his first meal, they gave him a menu, and not able to read any English, he just pointed to something in the middle, and they brought him ham and eggs, and he was very happy. So for the next breakfast, lunch, dinner, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, he pointed to the same thing, because as he told me he said, I didn't want to take any chances, and I like ham and eggs. It wasn't long after arriving in Connecticut and living with his father, who hadn't seen in 20 years. His father was used to being alone. I think he got pretty tired pretty quick of a 21-year-old, living in his house. So after just 2 or 3 weeks, his father convinced him what a great idea it would be to join the Army. My father said he did this because, he got seasick, so he couldn't join the Navy, and he said he was afraid of heights, so the Air Force was out, so the Army it was. So in 1940, well, it was still in 1945, he was trained as a medic and managed to find himself on a flat-bottom boat, transport ship, which was bringing new troops overseas and bringing back the injured soldiers. He traveled to the Philippines and Japan and back. He, I guess the whole trip, because the size of the boat, he said, felt every wave and back and forth, and everything fell out of the cabinets, and everything was broken, and he was sick the whole time, just giving vaccinations to the soldiers. Another thing he mentioned was that, besides the hell of rocking back and forth, being seasick, that they only had one record player. And all the other records had fallen out of the cabinets and smashed on the floor, but the one record on the stereo remained the same. And they listened to that all the way to Japan and Philippines and back, and they said when they get back, they're gonna get a new record. They're gonna buy a new record. And then they get back on the boat and they start heading over, and did you buy the record? Oh, we forgot the record. Another couple, 6, 8 weeks listening to the same record, and I asked them what that was, and it was You Go to My Head by Sam Donahue, which I have no idea what that song is, and I'm probably not surprised that he never played it, my whole life. And they never did buy another record. And when his term was over, he wanted to re-enlist. His plan was to stay in the Army, get a good education and everything, but he was just too seasick the whole time. So he left when his term was over. In 1948, he moved back to New York, where he worked as a waiter and bartender up and down the East Coast. In 1952,